Hello, Year 12. This will be a short screencast in which we cap off, or I'll cap off, sorry, the annotations that we did in class today. So I've just scanned in my pages from chapters 4 and 5 so you can finish annotating them, and then we'll be prepared to talk about them next week in class. So whilst there will be lots of different annotations, you won't necessarily use all of these in the analysis next week, nor in your essays, but you will have a range of different things that you can come back and forth from. And whilst I will specifically reference some quotes that I think are useful to have in your kind of evidence bank, you will need to think about how you're going to explain that quote and how you're going to link it to a larger point that you're trying to make about the text. I can't give you every piece of information about that. That will take some independent study and thought to develop. So we briefly talked about the fact that when Miriam gets out of prison, she was no longer human, much in the same way that we felt like Winston is when he comes out of room 101 and the Ministry of Love, or Mini Love as it is referred to. He is a changed man, and in earlier pages, we noted down where they talked about there being a conversion, and in the same way that she is not fully converted, say, to believe in the ideology of East Germany, Miriam does has become somehow less human, and they have somehow beat something out of her. And this is the kind of abuse that she had to withstand, being, practically drowned in cold water by these women who were shouting awful things at her, so horrific that when she came up, the insults were what she breathed, as if they became her, and that's why she is no longer human, and they took something away from her. So just a couple of little things there to note down. All right, let's move on to the next page, hopefully. Okay. Miriam says the other prisoners were brutal, and she does mention that the criminal prisoners, so this is people who steal, commit other such crimes that aren't necessarily politically based, had more privileges, and they were rewarded for abusing the political prisoners. That is, people who are opposed to the East German government and their regime. We have a brief reference here, a bit of intertextuality we talked about in my class, to Prisoner, the Australian TV series. That's a reminder that Anna Funder is the narrator, and she is outside the story and commenting on the story. If you were going to mention that, you'd need to talk about it in a bit more detail, but I'm going to leave that one to you because I've got to get through the rest of this chapter. What else have we got down here? Oh, we spoke again in class briefly about her being juvenile prisoner number 725, them constantly being counted, and that's mentioned 3, 4 times there, 5 times, and the way in which they were dehumanized and made to be less than, and that links back to what we said earlier about somehow something being taken away from her. All right, and then moving over, this is the 3rd page in the chapter, and so it's 33, I think. And we talked about her living with, we're going to be shortly introduced to Charlie, sorry. But there is more to come, and we know that because it says, I think of what is still to come. And that's Anna Funder maintaining the reader's attention, and also our curiosity and her curiosity is heightened knowing that there is more to come in Miriam's story. So she's released in 1970. She's 17 and a half, so this is a year and a half later. And whilst she marries this man, Charlie, there clearly seems to be some things still going on with her. She seems to be struggling with life because she's cut herself out of her own wedding photo. Or whilst Anna Funder wants to ask, and we probably ourselves want to know, she decides not to ask her because possibly that'll put her in a situation that will make both of them uncomfortable and maybe will reduce Miriam's ability to communicate her story because she might not feel comfortable with Anna anymore. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but just something to think about, Miriam's kind of mental state at this point. All right, now in the GDR, sport was closely linked with politics. So the government screened youngsters for their potential and fed them into training institutes for the glory of the nation. Because when you are in this kind of society, you are also trying to project out to others that you're a desirable place to be, but also to your own people that this is a desirable place to be, a place to be proud of, and that you are producing some of the best, despite maybe other ways that they might see themselves as less than the capitalist neighbors that they had in the West. We are introduced to Charlie, who decides he no longer wants to teach because he doesn't like what's going on in schools, and he is under the surveillance of the Stasi. And this nice little contrast, the two of them, me, an ex-criminal, and he under surveillance. They would come over and search the house from time to time. So the ordinariness of this, I said, and this is green because this is about control and the extensive powers as well of the Stasi, that they can, at will, go and search people's home without a question. Now, we already spoke about Animal Farm in class, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. It's a blacklisted text. That means it's banned, and because of the way in which it portrays Stalin's dictatorship, or alludes to Stalin's dictatorship through the analogy, because the story it doesn't feature people, it features animals who are playing characters that are men in who are involved in the Russian Revolution and later Stalin's dictatorship. Again, we're thinking here about control. Miriam is unable to study, she's unable to get a job, and so relies on sending her photos and getting her friends to send her the money they receive for them when she sends them under a kind of pseudonym. We spoke briefly about prisoners or people who were anti-government being rounded up and put away in order to hide them if they were embarrassing. In the same way that earlier in the book, the gentleman who worked at Anna Funda's television station, her bosses, were embarrassed by the stories by the Stasi themselves, and so in a way have hidden the stories of East Germany because they're embarrassed about them. So you might just draw a link like that. They haven't even left this cycle. Still today, we're talking the 1990s. At this point, they are unable to escape the embarrassment, and so they hide what embarrasses them. All right, let's have a look over here. She talks about the multiplicity, or I'm not even sure that that's the right word, but the way in which one act can be interpreted in two different ways, in the same way kind of as doublethink. So they've put in an application, her and Charlie, to leave, and they can either process it, accept it, and get rid of them because they are seen as opponents to the government and the state, or they can charge them with attempting to flee the Republic and thus jail them accordingly and charge them with the crime. But she says here, authorities might if the fancy took them. So they just can willy-nilly decide. There is no hard and fast rules, and that is kind of an expectation or a reality of these kinds of societies where you have this incredible amount of power to bend and manipulate the law. And I've just said the malleability, which means the way in which you can, like Play-Doh, bend it to the way you want, the law to suit the powerful. All right. We spoke about this again briefly, but here's the direct quote you might want to reference. German Democratic Republic paid lip service to the institutions of democracy. It's an insincere expression of support. That's what lip service means. So whilst they call themselves the German Democratic Republic, this is much of a euphemism. They're not really democratic. They don't really live up to the values that we expect of a democracy in the 20th and now 21st century. Then just this paragraph here is just really a commentary on the vast reach of the Stasi, which is unchecked by the law. They are not under the control of the law. They dictate to judges, etc., how they want sentences to go, who they want to be prosecuted, etc. There was no room for a person to defend themselves against the state because all the defense lawyers and all the judges were part of it. So in the same way, there's a link there that can be definitely drawn to the governance structure in 1984 and the ways in which no one can kind of stand against it because everybody is a part of it. The backbone, I feel, of this whole story is the fact that Miriam would not give up, and fun dimensions in the, I don't know if it's the first or second chapter, but it's when she receives that letter from the Argentinian man and she's kind of inspired to write that there were people that chose not to surrender, and kind of those people who decided to stand up for themselves, and that didn't work out well. And that's kind of her premise for writing, and her curiosity and interest in those stories is why she writes. And therefore that is why Miriam and her story is the opening and closing chapters of this book. So Miriam bookends the story as such. And you'll see she's the last chapter. Again, if you look at the contents page, you'll see that she's featured in the last story as well. All right, so we're moving on to page 38. And Miriam's trying to find out what happened to her husband, Charlie, who was supposedly committed suicide in custody. She thinks otherwise, and she's angry because they keep making up different excuses. She said the least people could do is get your story straight, but they don't care. They just continue to lie to her and to just say things that can protect themselves without really doing anything to help her or set her mind at ease, because they don't care. They're about controlling and looking out for themselves. And Charlie was a dissident who disagreed with them, and therefore was someone that they felt that they could and should eradicate. She is talking to her lawyer who's supposed to be, or an investigator, sorry, who is looking into Charlie's case, and she said, here across the desk was the face of the system itself, a mockery of a lawyer making a mockery of her. And it's just how, coming back to that idea of paying lip service, you have these structures with judges and lawyers, etc., but none of them are working to protect the individual. They're all out for the state. All right, let's carry on. So Miriam chucks up a bit of a fuss, and she eventually gets a funeral where she's able to see his body on display, but it's quite some distance away. There's a glass pane there, and the Stasi are there taking photos and all sorts of things. But the whole process of his burial reveals the extraordinary extent of their control in terms of the mortuary, the supposed removal of his body, and all sorts of other elements. She suggests that there's time for the body to be taken out because she thinks it's been taken because if he had committed suicide, his body would look a certain way, and because she thinks that's not what happened, his body obviously would reveal signs of that, and so they've had to cremate him, she thinks, to destroy that evidence. All right. Just got some other points in here, and she talks about how the Stasi then wanted to chat with her all the time, like, every now and again, and she just gets a card and she has to go. She eventually decides she's not going anymore. Then one day, a man turns up and says, it's, your application to leave, we're talking about the one that was a few pages ago before Charlie was taken into custody and killed, has been granted. And that night she had to leave on the train full of people being expelled, which means kicked out of the German Democratic Republic. Essentially, the deportation came 11 years too late, she says, and 6 months too early, because in 6 months, the German Democratic Republic would no longer exist, and East and West Germany would be united, and so the city itself would be united. And 11 years too late, as in 9 years earlier, Charlie has died or been killed, and now it's too late. She's obviously become she's a broken woman from what's happened to her, and thus that movement out of the country really didn't do much for her at this point in time. And she talks about, this is a bit of characterization about Miriam and how she is stuck. The past stopped when Charlie died. And while she's brave and strong, she's also broken, and she's all those things at once. And she says here, and I quite like this explanation, as she speaks, it is as if her existence is no longer real to her in itself, more like a living epitaph. And that's the inscription on a tombstone, to a life that was. So she's no longer living it. She seems to just live in the past of what used to be. Apart from, she lives in Leipzig, which is near Dresden. The investigators in Dresden. And also, I imagine she can easily access the women in Nuremberg. And these are the women who are trying to put together the files that were of shredded paperwork of the Stasi, because she wants to find out what happened to him. And she's hoping it's on some paperwork that they put together eventually. And she talks about the authorities who are still to this day maybe trying to deny her, because they just want to stop thinking about the past. They want to pretend it all didn't happen, much in the same way as some people might have about the Nazi element of Germany during the 1930s and 40s. And the years after that, people pretending that it wasn't there just to make themselves kind of be able to cope with it. And then again, that irony of her being in the tower, safe, where she can see everything, and where once upon a time she was the one that was under constant surveillance, always being watched. All right, the Linoleum Palace is a setting chapter, and this is describing Anna Funder's apartment. So we're back in Berlin. This apartment is in East Berlin, and it's obviously once was quite a beautiful building, but the browns and greys that she uses to describe it, and they are repeatedly used throughout, really set the scene for kind of a dark and dingy place. And again, it's winter, so it's freezing, and it creates this real sense of what East Germany is like, and that's Funder's opinion. And again, it's coloring the way that she presents the story, the backwardness of it all, the gruffness of the East German people, etc. Okay, so let's go on. Hold on, did we skip forward a page there? Let me have a look. No, just says, oh, Funder is deeply affected by Miriam's story, so it had winded me, she says. So you can just note that one down. What have we got here? Julia, who owns the apartment or sublets it to Miriam, often arrives at random time and takes things that are hers that she's left in the apartment. So sometimes when you move into a place, it will be partially furnished, and obviously it was, but Julia keeps coming and collecting it, and so she is denuding it, which means to be taking things away. And this line here is important, and it'll get mentioned again because Julia's story is one that's explored later in the text. But it says, Julia regards fixed appointments as intolerable constraints on her freedom. And this hints at something that's happened to her before that makes her feel like she can't be confined and she can't commit to appointments or meetings or times or schedules, because that maybe creates a sense of fear or anxiety for her, because even her behavior in the apartment suggests that things aren't 100% okay with her. She might be a bit of an unstable woman. All right, and then we've got the setting of the apartment, and, you know, the air here congeals with cold, just kind of like the top of a soup, you know, how it gets all like a bit of a layer across the top if you leave it out on the bench. The brown linoleum on the floor, everything here was broken or about to be. Each utilitarian piece, which means it has no like beautiful use, it's just for practical use, and that's basically everything in the GDR. When you are thinking about those socialist values, it's about everybody having what they need and not anything more than that. You just get what you need, and everything should be of practical use. And she talks about the extreme dark green of the bathroom, the brown tiled heater. But then this little moment, a reflection on, and I've got a pink one here for the connection of her relationship with Julia. Julia has left a tin of bucket full of coal outside the door, which you need to light her fire, and she must have gone down last night to the pitch dark cellar to fill it. And she feels a sense of kindness or a connection to Julia in that moment. And again, we'll come back to that later in the text. I know that she needs to be alone, but suffers from it too, and that her room is choked with cheap and broken things she feels she may want at some point in life, but may not be able to afford it if she abandons them. So, again, that's just a bit of a characterization of Julia, and I've noted olfactory over here because, again, we're talking about the smells and the setting of the scene in that moment, and that's Julia's current apartment, which in the summer you can smell the garbage bins outside because it rises up and is almost visible in her apartment. We're back to Julia's apartment that Anna is renting from her. And she talks about the degrees of brown. Dark in the hallways, flecked in my bedroom, a brown in the other bedroom, And it says, no matter how much is taken out, this linoleum palace continues to contain all the necessities for life, at the same time as it refuses to omit a single thing, either accidentally or arranged, of beauty or joy. In this, I think it is much like East Germany itself. So again, I've said that room is a metaphor for the German Democratic Republic. Brown, and this building she's talking about is the Palace der Republik, which it was demolished in 2008. But she talks about what it looked like, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Ministry of Love and the way that that's described in the text. So maybe you could find that reference in the book and see if there was even some similarities in that. When you look at it, you can't see it. Instead, the outside world and everything in it is reflected in a bent and brown way. In there, dreams were turned into words, decisions made, announcements applauded, backslapped. In there could be a whole other world, time warp, and you could disappear. And now it's actually, I visited there, Museum Island, but it no longer exists in its current format in 2017, but at the time of writing, which is 1996, it still exists, and she's just talking about what it looks like. Then this debate about whether it's good to remember or whether it's healthier to forget, and this kind of contrasts with or connects with what the gentleman from her work was saying earlier, and again for Miriam about the investigator, whether people, they don't know whether they should remember or forget, they can't decide and in which time frame you should be doing those different things, etc. All right, then again we've got a bit more setting around her apartment block, and I really like, I'm just going to read you this bit here because I love this description of this homeless man. In winter, the punks claim the underground station for warmth, while the drunks install themselves in tram shelters. Today, the corner stop is occupied by an old man with a mane of matted locks, a huge felt beard and flowing black robes. His belongings in plastic bags around him double as pillows. He is timeless and grand, like someone walked in from another century, a winter king. As passengers alight from trams, he acknowledges them as if they are supplicants, paying their respects to his throne, nodding to each and waving them on their way. So I just thought that's such a great little description, and those kinds of descriptions are throughout the book. And the reason I would acknowledge some of those things and maybe be annotating them, underlining them, etc., is the way that Anna's perceptions color this whole story. She is sympathetic to certain people, and she is quite harsh in the way that she describes and depicts others, and that being the Stasi men, who she can be quite harsh to, and very sympathetic to the victims, which is not unwarranted, but you need to think about the way in which that affects the story. All right, this is just a link here to her curiosity, and I think that might be the end of the chapter that I've scanned. So I'll sign off. Thanks for listening. Hope you're all up to date with your annotations. I'll see you in class.